The history of Israel begins in ancient times, with the region of Canaan located between the Mediterranean Sea and the Jordan River. This territory was inhabited by various peoples, including the Canaanites, before the ancient Hebrews came to settle there. The Bible tells that Abraham, considered the patriarch of the Hebrew people, was guided by God to this promised land. Abraham had a son named Isaac, who in turn was the father of Jacob. Jacob had 12 sons, who became the 12 tribes of Israel. One of the most well-known stories is that of Joseph, who was sold by his brothers and taken to Egypt, where he later became an important leader during a great famine. Jacob's entire family emigrated to Egypt. In Egypt, the Hebrews lived for centuries, but over time they were enslaved by the pharaohs. According to biblical tradition, Moses was chosen by God to free his people after many plagues and miracles. Moses led the Israelites out of Egypt in the event known as the Exodus. This story profoundly marked the identity of the people of Israel. The Exodus took the Hebrews through the desert for 40 years. During that time, Moses received the 10 Commandments on Mount Sinai, which is considered the formal beginning of the Jewish religion. At the end of the journey, Joshua, Moses' successor, led the people in the conquest of Canaan, thus establishing the Israelite presence in that region. The Israelites were initially organized into independent tribes, governed by judges. It was a period of constant conflict with neighboring peoples such as the Philistines. One of the most famous judges was Samson. Later, the Israelites asked to have a king like other nations, which led to the establishment of the monarchy with Saul as the first king. David succeeded Saul and became one of the most famous kings of Israel. He conquered Jerusalem and established it as the capital of the kingdom. His son Solomon built the first temple, a sacred place for the worship of Yahweh. The kingdom of Israel reached great splendor during this period, with political stability, trade, and art. The kingdom was divided in two, the kingdom of Israel to the north and the kingdom of Judah to the south. This division weakened the Hebrew people, making them vulnerable to foreign powers. In the year 722 BC, the northern kingdom was conquered by Assyria, and later in 586, the kingdom of Judah was conquered by Babylon. During the Babylonian conquest, the Temple of Jerusalem was destroyed, and many Jews were taken into exile in Babylon. This exile marked an important stage in the religious evolution of the Jewish people. During this time, the Jews began to organize their faith without the need for a temple, with emphasis on the scriptures and the law. In 539 BC, Cyrus the Great of Persia conquered Babylon and allowed the Jews to return to Jerusalem. The temple, known as the Second Temple, was rebuilt, and a new era under Persian rule began. This period brought stability, although the Jews still did not have full sovereignty and lived as a province of the vast Persian Empire. Over time, Alexander the Great conquered the region and gave way to the Hellenistic rule. Some Jews adopted Greek customs, which caused internal tensions. Later, under the Seleucid rule, attempts were made to impose Greek culture by force. This provoked the rebellion of the Maccabees, who managed to regain control and purify the temple. After the death of Alexander the Great, his empire was divided among his generals. The region of Judea passed into the hands of the Seleucids. At first, Jews were able to practice their faith, but over time, the kings began to impose Greek culture more strongly, which caused deep tensions with the Jewish population. King Epiphanes was especially harsh with the Jews. He prohibited the practice of their religion, destroyed sacred texts, and desecrated the Temple of Jerusalem. Dedicating this religious oppression to the Greek gods caused great indignation among the Jews, especially among those most faithful to their ancestral faith. In the midst of this crisis, a priestly family known as the Maccabees emerged. The patriarch, Mattathias, refused to obey the king's orders and killed a Seleucid official along with his sons. He began a revolt that grew with the support of the people, thus beginning the famous Maccabean rebellion against Greek rule. After the death of Mattathias, his son Judas Maccabeus took the leadership of the rebellion. Despite having fewer resources than the Seleucids, the Jews used guerrilla strategies and a deep knowledge of the terrain to resist. The fighting was difficult, but their religious and nationalist fervor gave them great strength. In the year 164 BC, the Maccabees achieved a great victory. They recovered Jerusalem and purified the temple. This purification is celebrated to this day with the Jewish holiday of Hanukkah. They lit a menorah with oil that miraculously lasted 8 days, a symbol of hope and faith in the face of oppression. Although the Maccabees managed to regain control of the temple, the fight continued. The conflict was not only external, there were also internal divisions between Jews who wanted to keep their faith pure and others who had become Hellenized. The war lasted several years with constant clashes for total control of Judea. Finally, the Maccabees. They consolidated their victory and founded the Hasmonean dynasty, a line of Jewish kings who ruled with a certain autonomy for almost a century. However, their government mixed political power with religious power, something that caused tensions between Jewish groups who did not agree with this union. During the Hasmonean period, there were internal conflicts between different Jewish factions. Pharisees, Sadducees, and Essenes. Each group had its interpretation of the law and how to live the faith. These religious and political divisions weakened Jewish society just when new external threats approached. Ingressar texto. Meanwhile, Rome began to expand its power throughout the Mediterranean when two Hasmonean brothers fought for the throne. Both asked for help from the Romans. This decision would be fatal, since Rome took advantage of the conflict to intervene militarily and establish its domicile in the region of Judea. In 63 BC, the Roman general Pompey captured Jerusalem and made it part of the Roman Empire, although the Jews retained a certain religious autonomy. They were now under Roman control. A new era of foreign domination began. Constant disputes between imperial power and Jewish aspirations under Roman rule were ruled first by local kings allied to Rome, such as Herod the Great. He was known for his cruelty, but also for his large construction projects. His most famous work was the expansion of the Second Temple in Jerusalem, which became majestic for the Jewish people. However, he was not respected by many Jews and was seen as a puppet of Rome, and his reign was marked by repression. After his death, the territory was divided among his sons, but Rome soon imposed Roman procurators to directly control the Jews. One of those procurators was Pontius Pilate, who ruled with an iron fist. His treatment of the Jewish people was seen as offensive and provocative. During this period of oppression, many Jews were hoping for the arrival of a Messiah, a savior figure who would free them from foreign rule and restore them to glory. It was in this context that Jesus of Nazareth emerged, a Jewish preacher who spoke of love, justice, and the kingdom of God. He attracted many followers, especially among the poor and marginalized. His teachings challenged both Roman power and the Jewish religious authorities, who saw him as a threat. Jesus preached in Galilee and Judea and performed miracles. According to the stories, his fame grew rapidly, but so did concern among religious and political leaders. His entry into Jerusalem was seen as a provocative act. Within a few days, he was arrested, tried, and sentenced to death by crucifixion, by order of Pontius Pilate. The crucifixion of Jesus occurred around the year 30. He was executed as a criminal, but his followers believed he had risen from the dead. This event gave rise to a new faith, Christianity.
La crucifixión de Jesús ocurrió alrededor del año 30,
but over time it grew and expanded throughout the Roman Empire. While Christianity grew, The Jews
Este evento
remained
dio
under
origen
Roman
a una
rule.
nueva fe,
Tensions
el
constantly
cristianismo.
increased. Many
Al
Jews
principio
expected a
era un
rebellion that would
movimiento
free them,
dentro del
and some
judaísmo,
groups,
pero con
such
el
as the
tiempo
Elotes,
creció y se
would
expandió
promote
por todo el
armed
imperio
struggle.
romano.
This situation led to a major revolt against Rome in the year 66 AD. The First Jewish-Roman War was brutal. The Romans, led by General Titus, crushed the rebellion with extreme force. In the year 70 AD, Jerusalem was besieged and destroyed. The Second Temple, the center of Jewish religious life, was razed. This was a devastating blow to the Jewish people. The destruction of the temple profoundly changed the Jewish religion. Without the temple, Jews began to gather in synagogues and focus on the Torah. Rabbis became the new religious leaders. Jewish identity began to reorganize itself away from temple sacrifice and more around teaching and law. Although the revolt was put off, the desire for freedom did not die. Years later, in 132 AD, a new revelation broke out, led by Simon Kojba. Many considered him the Messiah. At first it was successful, but Rome responded harshly. 135. The rebellion was defeated, and thousands of Jews died or were exiled after the defeat. The Romans expelled many Jews from Judaism. The region was renamed Palestine by Emperor Hadrian in an attempt to erase Jewish identity, was transformed into a Roman city called Aelia Capitolina, and Jews were forbidden to enter it. Thus began the Jewish diaspora, a long period in which Jews lived dispersed throughout the world. Many settled in places like Babylon, Egypt, Spain, North Africa, and later in Eastern Europe. Despite the distance, they preserved their faith, their sacred language, and the hope of returning to Zion. During the Middle Ages, Jews lived under different empires and governments. Some places offered tolerance, but many others were scenes of persecution. In Europe, Jews were forced to live in ghettos and suffered discrimination and violence, such as during the Crusades or the Spanish Inquisition. Despite being dispersed, Jews never abandoned the hope of returning to Jerusalem. Every year during Passover and other festivities, they repeated the phrase, "Next year in Jerusalem." This hope became an essential part of their spiritual and cultural identity as an eternal dream of return. For centuries, Jews adapted to many cultures, learned new languages, and participated in the economic life of the countries where they lived. Even so, they were seen as different, which generated suspicion and prejudice. This anti-Semitism spread to many parts of the world, especially in Europe. In the 18th and 19th centuries, with the Enlightenment and modernity, some Jews became more integrated into European society. Movements emerged that sought to adapt Judaism to the modern world, such as Reform Judaism. But racist movements that saw Jews as a threat also grew. At the end of the 19th century, Zionism emerged, a political movement that proposed that Jews needed their own state. The journalist Theodore was one of its main founders. His idea was that after centuries of persecution, the only solution was to return to the land of their ancestors, Palestine. This was hotly debated among the Jews themselves. Some strongly supported it, while others preferred to fight for equality in their countries of residence. However, many began to emigrate to Palestine, which at that time was part of the Ottoman Empire, in the hope of rebuilding a homeland. At the beginning of the 20th century, small groups of Jews began to buy land in Palestine and founded farms and communities called Aleppo. Although they were few, their number was gradually growing. At the same time, the local Arab population began to worry about the massive arrival of Jews. During the First World War, the Ottoman Empire collapsed and Palestine passed into the hands of the United Kingdom under the British Mandate. In 1917, the British government issued the Balfour Declaration, supporting the idea of a national home for the Jewish people in Palestine, which generated hope among Zionists. However, the British also promised independence to the Arabs if they helped them against the Ottomans. This double promise caused tensions between Jews and Arabs. Both peoples claimed the right to live in that land. Clashes began to increase as more Jews immigrated to the region. During the 1920s and 1930s, there was a surge in Jewish immigration to Palestine, many of whom were facing rising anti-Semitism in Europe, and more Jewish schools and communities were founded. Violent conflicts between Arabs and Jews also increased, as did pressure on the British, who were trying to control the situation. As attention grew, the British began to limit Jewish immigration to Palestine. This was especially serious when in the 1930s, Nazism began to persecute Jews in Germany. Many Jews sought refuge, but could not easily enter Palestine because of British restrictions. During World War II, the Jewish people lived an immense tragedy, the Holocaust. 6 million Jews were murdered by the Nazis in concentration camps. This catastrophe left a deep mark on the history of the Jewish people and on the world's conscience. It was one of the greatest human tragedies after the Holocaust. Survivors had nowhere to go. They wanted to rebuild their lives, and many dreamed of emigrating to Palestine. International pressure grew to allow them to enter. At the same time, the Jewish community in Palestine became better organized and strengthened its institutions, preparing to form a state. The British could no longer control the situation. The attacks Jews like him and the Haganah were increasing. Arab attacks were also occurring. Palestine became ungovernable for the United Kingdom, which decided to hand the problem over to the United Nations, asking for an international solution. In 1947, the UN proposed a plan to divide Palestine into 2 states, one Jewish and one Arab. Jerusalem would be an international city. Jewish leaders accepted the plan with reservations, but the Arab leaders rejected it. Shortly after, armed clashes between the 2 communities began on May 14, 1948. David Ben-Gurion proclaimed the birth of the State of Israel. The following day, 5 Arab countries, Egypt, Jordan, Syria, Lebanon, and Iraq, invaded the new country, starting the first Arab-Israeli war. It was the beginning of a long and complex conflict that continues to this day. Israel managed to resist the invasion and gained territories beyond those allocated by the UN. Hundreds of thousands of Palestinian Arabs fled or were not expelled. Starting the Palestinian refugee problem at the same time, many Jews in Arab countries were expelled or fled to Israel. After its independence, Israel received a large number of Jewish immigrants from Europe and Africa. Many were Holocaust survivors or expelled from Arab countries. The young state faced enormous challenges: poverty, wars, cultural integration, and the construction of a new national identity. In 1967, the Six-Day War broke out. Israel, fearing an attack, launched an offensive against Egypt, Syria, and Jordan. In just 6 days, it conquered Jerusalem. In this Cisjordan Heron, the Golan Heights and the Sinai were a great victory, but they also marked the beginning of a prolonged occupation. The victories of 1967 changed the map, but they also deepened the conflict. Palestinians who had lost their land began to organize politically in 1964. The PLO, the Palestine Liberation Organization, was founded, led by Arafat, which demanded the creation of a Palestinian state. In 1973, Egypt and Syria launched a surprise attack on Israel on the Feast of Yom Kippur. At first, Israel was surprised, but then recovered and counterattacked. Although it ended up winning militarily, the country was shaken by the experience. The war led to a deep reflection on its security. In 1979, Egypt and Israel signed a historic peace agreement. It was the first time that an Arab country officially recognized Israel. In exchange, Israel returned the Sinai to Egypt. This agreement was promoted by the Egyptian president and the Israeli prime minister. with the mediation of the United States. Meanwhile, the situation with the Palestinians became more dense. In 1987 broke out the First Intifada, a popular revolt in Cisjordan and Gaza against the Israeli occupation. It was a movement led by young Palestinians without heavy weapons, which aroused the cause. In 1993, Israel and the PLO signed the Oslo Accords for the first time. Both recognized each other. Palestinian leader Arafat and Israeli Prime Minister Rabin shook hands before the world. It was a moment of hope. However, the peace was fragile, and the process faced many obstacles and violence. In 2000, the Second Intifada broke out, more violent than the first, with suicide bombings, military repression, and much suffering on both sides. Israel built a separation wall in Jordan, which generated even more divisions. The hope of a peaceful solution began to fade. In recent years, Israel has become a technological and economic power, having signed peace agreements with several Arab countries, such as the United Arab Emirates. However, the conflict with the Palestinians remains unresolved. With frequent clashes in Gaza and tensions in Jerusalem, the history of Israel is a history of faith, resistance, and conflict, a people who returned to their ancient land after centuries of exile, but also a region marked by deep disputes. Today, Israel remains a central country on the world stage, with a future full of challenges, but also of hope.